Welcome back to Podcast Greatness, right? It's my pleasure right now, sarcastically, some truth in the middle. Matt Moscona, after further review.
How are you, JD?
Great to see you.
Always.
Thanks for coming down across the street there. Of course, you can catch him 3 to 6 daily across the world. If you're an LSU fan, Saints fan, local sports fan here in Louisiana. So it's never boring here in the great city of Baton Rouge. The last 72 hours, right? So the breaks that Brian Kelly's the guy. People are saying that the President of the United States landed at the airport the other day. That was a production, wasn't it?
Yeah. The band is there and the dignitaries are there. Kim Mulkey did not lift Brian Kelly like she did Paul Maneri for her landing. But
there were no coaches at the airport this time.
Right.
I think they were all busy.
Probably so.
But there was, I'd say, roughly 100 LSU fans were there along the fence. He waved to them, and there were some vehicles that are much more expensive than I can afford that were part of that.
The motorcade,
the motorcade,
the police-led motorcade to canvas. It was a production.
It was something. Man, everything is image these days, right? Looking big time and whatnot. And so the press conference yesterday, which I thought was pretty well executed, right? The president of LSU, William Tate, shares some words. Scott Woodward, who I think you've been talking about, he's a Catholic high guy, an LSU guy. He's been building up to this decision his whole life. So he presents the coach.
I thought the word Scott Woodward used over and again was alignment. And it's what he's used when he was introduced. He mentioned everybody sort of rowing in the same direction. And it matters because when you think about the context of what Scott Woodward is trying to build at LSU, it's recreating what worked so well in the early 2000s, where you had Mark Emmert, you had Scott Woodward, you had Skip Bertman as your athletic director, you had Nick Saban as the head coach. You had people from the university administration, the athletic administration, within the football office, all aligned on what their goal was. And when that's the case, we all know this state. There's strange political bedfellows, and there's a lot of political,
names that have to be mentioned during the press conference.
Exactly. Things are so interwoven, right? Yeah. With politics and money and boosters and the football program and the university, that when you have a disconnect there, you can have a situation like what happened at the end of the 2015 season, where the governor, the university president, the AD, the football coach were not all on the same page. It was a very ugly public fiasco with Les Miles at the end. This is what happens when everybody has a very clear, concise vision. Look at the state of LSU athletics right now. Look at the coaches that are on this roster right now. Yeah. It's incredible what Scott Woodward's done in a very short amount of time.
And Matt, I was just trying to be positive on Twitter yesterday and share some positivity, and I said that I don't think LSU's ever been better run than it is right now with Scott Woodward. I mean, even Skip Bertman said, he's the best AD we've ever had in Scott Woodward. And you look at Kim Mulkey leaving Baylor. She would never leave Baylor. She did. Jay Johnson hasn't coached the game yet, but all the reviews seem to be very, very positive. And, Brian Kelly was kind of a hire that maybe lulled us to sleep. Why would a 60-year-old guy who's been at Notre Dame 12 years and have a team that's 11-1 and ranked number 6 in the college football playoff rankings leave Notre Dame to go to LSU? That doesn't make sense, does it? And sure enough, we talked about a lot of different people, and Kelly's the guy.
And I think it does make sense why he would leave, because he hit a glass ceiling in South Bend. And one of the things that might be lost, with the context is understanding, how about this for perspective? If you're a high school senior right now being recruited, you weren't even alive when Nick Saban won his national championship at LSU. Or you were a baby.
Yeah.
You were an infant.
Yeah. 18 years ago.
They don't care. Recruits today don't care about the Four Horsemen or Newt Rockne or even Tony Rice in 1988. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The history of Notre Dame doesn't matter to a recruit. And the built-in advantages Notre Dame had for so many years with their NBC TV contract being the only program on TV every week, well, now everybody's on TV every week. So if you're recruiting to South Bend, you're recruiting to a place that is in the Midwest. It's cold and gray.
You spent a year up there, not to interrupt you, but Matt spent a year in South Bend, Indiana. And Rudy, we grew up on the movie Rudy, which I guess now is 30 years ago or so.
94 was Rudy.
Yeah, so roughly
almost 30 years.
and just this Hollywood mystique of the gold helmets and touchdown Jesus and all that stuff. And you spent a year there. It's freezing cold. Paul Maneri told me one time the sun goes away in October. I don't see it again until April.
We got our first snow in October and our last snow in May when I was there. When Brian Kelly's family walked into the press conference and saw his daughter in a T-shirt and his son in T-shirt and shorts, I was like, they've got to be in heaven. Because I guarantee you they haven't worn T-shirts in December for 12 years. So they had to be ecstatic. So yes, the point is, you have a lot of natural disadvantages. Indiana's not a talent-rich state. If you try to get a kid from South Florida to come up to South Bend and they look around, they're going to go, really? The campus is beautiful at Notre Dame, and they do have great tradition. But you're not in a conference, so you don't play a conference championship game. So that's actually a negative as well. There's a lot of disadvantages that work against Notre Dame that honestly I believe Brian Kelly just maximized what you can do there. I don't believe Notre Dame can win a national championship in this culture.
Yeah. I remember watching that national championship game they played against Notre Dame. And,
Alabama, when they played Alabama.
Excuse me, Notre Dame against Alabama, excuse me. And I remember Lou Holtz on the set afterwards. Looked like someone had killed his dog, because he was so invested in Notre Dame to play well. And he's I don't know why they didn't play well. And I'm like, well, probably because Alabama's got 45 NFL players and Notre Dame's got 5 or 10 or something.
That's about how it goes.
Yeah, and so and even going back before him, when Charlie Weiss had a team that I think was 10-2 or something and played LSU in the Sugar Bowl, and LSU just with Jamarcus and those guys were just.
Yeah, that was Brady Quinn's team. I mean, that was a good team. Jeff Samardzija. I mean, that was a good, by their standards, a good Notre Dame team that got walloped. It was 41-14, something like that.
41-14, I think you're right. Yeah, and so there you go. And so you impressed by the press conference, Matt. I just think right now, and forget about the long-term talk of winning championships. LSU needed somebody to stop the bleeding. Okay. I enjoyed covering Coach Orgeron, and I'm not going to be the guy that once the coach leaves town, I'm going to start bagging on him or whatnot. But if LSU was a car, it was leaking oil, some tires that hit some potholes, and it was not going in the right direction. And this guy, Brian Kelly, is a pro, right? I mean, he's a professional who has been in the big-time media and been at Notre Dame. I think he brings a calming presence, and let's get this back on the right track.
He is, a lot of times if a coach is fired, and I think this is just a general practice with any athletic director in any sport. When a coach is fired, you tend to try to hire his or her opposite to see how you feel. Look at, say, when LSU went from John Brady in basketball to Trent Johnson. Personality-wise, polar opposites, right? In football, from Les Miles to Ed Orgeron, personality is very different. One's offensive minded, one's defensive minded.
Les lets us spend time with our family. He's not so cracking a whip. And then not to interrupt you too, but like Smoke. I love covering Smoke Lavelle baseball. He was kind of, some would say sluggish and kind of, and then Maneri was just so media polished and energetic and upbeat. So,
with Ed. Ed was just this big ball of energy, like a chained pit bull, right? A pit bull on a leash. And when things were going really well, it was positive and it was energy, all that stuff was great. But when things were going badly, that magnified exponentially. Brian Kelly is everything Ed isn't. He's mature and he's polished and he's measured and like you said, he's almost like a politician in some respects. I mean, you could put him in a suit and a tie, and the guy passed the CIA exam. You know what I mean? It's like he literally has that background. He fills in a lot of those gaps. I think he'll be great with fans. He'll be great with recruits. He'll win a lot of games. I think it's a home run in every way it can be.
And not to belabor the point, we've talked about it, and I thought it to myself when they announced he'd be the guy. I was thinking LSU's never hired a guy at the time of the hire more accomplished than this guy.
Not even debatable. That's not even debatable.
Yeah. I heard your show yesterday. You talked about that. I mean, Nick Saban was the perfect marriage between the guy who was going to become the greatest coach of all time in a program that had been a sleeping giant, and many of the things that he put into place, LSU was still winning off of. But, and I joked, if Twitter was around in 2005, we're going to replace Nick Saban, the guy who gave us our first national championship in roughly 50 years, with Les Miles from Okie State, who was 28-21.
Yep.
And the job elevated Les Miles to a great run as a coach. And Ed Orgeron, Matt, is there any coach in the history of college football that's going to go 10-25 at one school and win a national championship after? I don't think something like that's ever going to happen again.
I'd have to think I don't think it'll happen again. I'd have to think if it's happened before. If I could give you one, maybe to keep an eye on, maybe a guy like Matt Rule if he makes his way back into college. And his record in college wasn't sterling because he took over two of the worst jobs in college football with Temple and Baylor. And when he inherited them, I think his first year at Baylor he was 1-11. His first year at Temple he might have been like 2-10, something like that. So, yeah. But he built them.
He was a miracle worker.
He was. It was great. And I think he'll be back in college eventually.
Yeah, his name was brought up. He was interesting. I was wondering about him, Miracle worker, a little bit like Mike Leach, take the program that no one is expecting to do well, but can he thrive in a situation where people demand you do well and rise to that expectation? And so as Matt and I are sitting here right now, we don't know anything about the staff. We are assuming that Corey Raymond would be back. But I asked him in the press conference yesterday, and he said that he had not had any discussions. Now, whether or not he could share anything at that point, I don't know, but we'll see about that. Marcus Freeman, the defensive coordinator who LSU courted last year in the offseason, has decided, well, not decided, it's not much of a decision. He's the head coach at Notre Dame now, and so Reese, the offensive coordinator, is going to stay with him. I think the whole staff is staying up there with him. So Brian Kelly got some work to do. We'll
see if he's able to pull any staff members. And what members at LSU he might retain. It makes a lot of sense for Corey Raymond. Why would anybody not retain Corey Raymond? I mean, he's the godfather of DBU. Of course you keep him.
He's the new Sam Nader now. We bring him over every step.
Well, you'd be stupid not to. Yeah. And Corey's at a point in his career where maybe he has defensive coordinator ambitions, but I don't think he's going to take a step back. Like, he's not going to go become a defensive coordinator at a G5 school, right? I mean, and I don't know that he'll have the opportunity at this point to be a Power 5 defensive coordinator. So I think he's content to be at his alma mater, be beloved, coach defensive backs, make a lot of money, and any coach would be foolish not to have him. I think Brad Davis, the offensive line coach, is someone who's really interesting. Remember, they gave him a 3-year deal, which is abnormal for an assistant, but they got him last summer, late in the process. Yeah. And he did well, getting that offensive line to develop throughout the year. I think Mickey Joseph is an interesting one as well, and because you got to be able to recruit New Orleans, and Mickey is the New Orleans connection, and Brian Kelly had Terry Joseph, Mickey's cousin, on his staff with him at Notre Dame. He's at Texas now, but he had him with him at Notre Dame, so he's familiar. And the other one I'd say is Kevin Falk, which I think makes a lot of sense if you keep Kevin Falk in as the running backs coach. So those are the four I would say to really keep an eye on. Yeah. Well, man, it's interesting because when Les was fired and Ed Ogeron became the head coach, nothing really changed. It was the same. It was the same staff. Dave Aranda had been hired by Les Miles, and Steve Ensminger was already on the staff. He was just bumped up a bit, and all those guys. And so I guess there is that kind of that tight walk or that balance between, okay, we can't keep too many guys from the old staff because y'all said that was unsuccessful because you fired the head coach, but then also kind of mixing in the new guys as well. So. I think obviously Ed Ogeron's failures were his inability to identify and hire good coordinators. I mean, that's evident. You mentioned Aranda was already on staff. Yes, Ensminger was promoted. He was already on staff, and Ed promoted him. But after hiring Matt Canada and failing spectacularly in a year, would Ed Ogeron have gone and found Steve Ensminger if he wasn't already on staff? Yeah. I don't think so. Yeah. Jake Peets, Scott Linehan, Bo Pelini, we know the list. So I think, by contrast, look at Brian Kelly, who at Notre Dame has hired as defensive coordinator Bob Diaco and Clark Lee and Mike Elko and most recently Marcus Freeman. He's a guy who knows how to identify coaching talent. I think whoever he brings in as coordinators will be fine. Elko might be one to watch. I'm just this is kind of a talk show format, but I have heard he's not happy over at A&M. So come on down. Come on, Mike. Come on down. But Durante Jones has, built up some goodwill with the fans the way the LSU played down the stretch there. So, be interesting to see what happens there. And LSU 6-6, waiting to hear on a bowl game, and so that's another thing I find interesting, trying to balance out the current team to play in a bowl game, and then hire a new staff, and then recruit to get guys signed up on December the 15th. It's a pretty fascinating time down the street there. Somebody asked if Brian Kelly would coach the bowl game. That's a terrible idea. I think I remember Sonny Dykes maybe doing that at SMU after he'd been there for like a few weeks, and they got blown out in the bowl game. Yeah. That Brian Kelly needs to focus on finishing his staff and finishing this recruiting class. I mean, he is going to have to re-recruit this roster. He's going to have to make sure the current commits are on board, which there's no reason I think at this point any of them wouldn't be thrilled. If they were hanging on, and then this is the hire you deliver, I don't know why any of them would leave. And then finishing out this recruiting class, because 80% of high school signees are going to put pen to paper in middle December. So LSU's got a talented roster, Jacques, provided they get guys back and get guys that were injured healthy. You supplement with this recruiting class with the transfer portal, especially in spots like offensive line, linebacker, a spot here or there. There's no reason this team couldn't be a New Year's Six contender next year. Pushing up on a 10-2 type season. I think that's very realistic if he makes the right decisions here in these next few weeks.
Yeah, they open with Florida State, who obviously is not a juggernaut. That'll be in the Superdome. Alabama comes to Baton Rouge next year, so those are some interesting points. And yeah, if you're Brian Kelly, Matt, is that really high risk and very little reward to coachable to take over a team that's been 6-6 and just kind of all over the place, and have the optics of you standing on the sideline and they lose, and then you're 0-1 as the head coach, and that carries all the way into the offseason.
Yeah.
And kind of like a golfer, LSU needs their swing broken down and rebuilt.
Yeah.
That's why you have spring football, especially in this case, to install a new offense and to new defense or whatever they want to do and move forward with that. And real quick, there's been a lot of national kind of negative press on Kelly leaving Notre Dame, and I'm not saying this just because I'm covering LSU here. There's no perfect way to divorce in this situation, right? There's no on this day you name your head coach if you want to do the calendar is very unfriendly to doing anything like this, right? And so I know there's some players up there that I think they were all blindsided, right?
Yeah,
shocked.
I think so. Sounds that way. The kids aren't professionals, but the coaches are, and they have families and a lot of things to consider outside of just what happens on the football field at that particular place. Coaches have to make decisions for themselves, for their families, and for Brian Kelly, he's a 60-year-old who has one box that he hasn't checked on his professional resume. It's national champion. And his decision to come to LSU tells you exactly what you needed to know. He knew he wasn't going to be able to do that there. You could do it here. The last three coaches at LSU have won national championships. We all talked about that. He can do it here. And he's stepping into enormous expectations in a division that has Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher. I mean, you just look around. Arkansas is coming along. Lane Kiffin's at Ole Miss. Mike Leach is at Mississippi State. And, man, then you look at Napier going to Florida, and you got to play them every year. He walked into an unforgiving situation, but he was willing to do it because he knew that he's confident in himself and that he'll have the resources to win big here. But you're right, there's no perfect timing. It's not like the NFL where you have a very definitive end of the season and then the coaching carousel starts spinning. But it's unfortunate that it has to go down that way, but there is no way to have a clean break.
Yeah, shark-infested waters, to be sure, what he's going to go swimming into now. It'll be interesting. It's going to be fascinating to watch moving forward. Hunt Palmer on your air had a guest come on, and I thought his take was unfair. He said, well, you better win. If you don't win a national championship down at LSU, they'll fire you. They'll fire you after 2 years. And I think that a reasonable expectation, just my opinion, is when you dip, you don't dip to 6-6. If you dip to 9-3, and every second or third year, if you're in the running and you got a shot at an SEC or national title, I think that's what they expect out of you.
I think that's fair. I think at a place like LSU, the floor should be, 9-3, and you should be consistently in the running for a New Year's Six every year. And in those given years where you can break through and make a playoff appearance, that should be the expectation given the resources. But consider, Jacques, people make a big deal out of the contract. I say this all the time. I don't care about the number, the dollar amount. It doesn't matter. If you're winning, it doesn't matter what you're paying the coach because he's worth it tenfold, maybe 100-fold. Mm-hmm. What matters is the buyout. If it's not going well, can you get out of it? We just saw this with Ed Ogeron. LSU painted themselves in a corner, and they had to pay him a lot of money. Brian Kelly's buyout is 90% of his remaining contract. Ooh. So, for better or worse, you are financially tied to Brian Kelly for a decade. For the next 10 years, you are financially tied to this man. So that goes to show you the level of confidence Scott Woodward and this administration have in the hire they made.
It goes to show you how much it's changed. And I never covered Joe Dean or didn't know him. And, God rest his soul and all that. But I heard even after Nick Saban won a national title, I heard stories about, I think we could have got Nick Saban for $1 million and not $1.2 million.
Yeah.
The penny pinching and all that. I mean, LSU is just, and I said last night, man, there's some rock stars down the street right now. And Brian Kelly, who is known coast to coast, he'll be a Hall of Fame coach, right? And Tim Mulkey and Jay Johnson and Beth Torina and Jay Clark, a great gymnastics coach, and Will Wade, what he's doing. So
Joe Dean had to shop on the discount rack because LSU lived perennially in the red. And his background as a CEO with Converse and as an executive, he knew how to get LSU financially into the black, and he did that. And he did it in a way that set LSU up for great success. But make no mistake, LSU's been operating in the black for a long time, man. There is no need to penny pinch any longer at a place like LSU.
And as we wrap, and not to diss on people who are no longer here, but I mean, just compare this coaching search and the way they executed it and the way they pulled it off. Even if they talked to Lincoln Riley, I don't know, or whatever. But compared to 2015 or 16, the way that went compared to this, I mean, it is just, another galaxy, really, isn't it?
Joe Oliva's the worst athletic director I've ever seen. And you now have many illustrations of someone doing something very well, now to compare it to a person doing the job very poorly.
Yeah.
From hiring to fundraising to public relations. I mean, Joe Oliva, I am the search. The Florida fiasco in 2016.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a disaster.
Yeah. And you can't, I don't want to sound like I'm talking with my mouth full because, look, Ed Ogeron went 9-4. They don't blow a coverage against Notre Dame in that Citrus Bowl. They're 10-3. 2018, they're 10-3. That Texas A&M loss was really controversial. They go 11-2. They still finished in the top 6. And then, of course, 2019, the greatest thing we've ever seen. So that all happened. But in the long run, it was proven that maybe to sustain a program, to know a calendar, all those different things, it just didn't work out. And it was time for a change. So you can enjoy the success and also say it was time for a change and be behind the new head coach. They're not, what's the word I'm looking for?
Mutually exclusive.
Mutually exclusive. This got his radio. I type things in a teleprompter here. So we're going to wrap up on that one, and I'm sure we'll have him back. The great Matt Moscona, thanks for coming down.
All right, JD. My pleasure. Thank you.